From CBS News Bay Area, this is the Morning Edition.
This morning, conflict continues in the Middle East. Israel's military expands its ground operations in Gaza with attacks from the air, land, and sea. And Israel's prime minister predicts it will be a long and difficult campaign. And here at home, thousands of demonstrators shut down San Francisco's Central Freeway, there to demand a ceasefire in Gaza and increased aid for innocent Palestinians trapped in the middle. Plus, after more than a decade, a public Halloween celebration returns to the Castro district. How organizers are striving to make this weekend's event more family-friendly. Good morning, and thanks for starting your day with us. Today is Sunday, October 29th. I'm Max Darrow. This morning, Israeli tanks and infantry backed by airstrikes are expanding an incursion into Gaza. Drone footage from Gaza shows a mosque reduced to rubble following an airstrike this morning. The Israeli Defense Forces say their fighter jets have hit more than 450 targets in just the past 24 hours. Those targets reportedly include Hamas command centers, observation posts, and anti-tank missile launching positions. The IDF also says it sent more ground forces into Gaza overnight. Israeli bombardments had knocked out most of Gaza's phone and internet service on Friday night, but we're learning this morning at least part of that communication network has been restored. CBS's Bradley Blackburn is monitoring the latest developments and joins us live from New York. Good morning, Bradley. Israel's prime minister said last night that this war with Hamas has entered a new phase.
He did, Max, and this morning Israeli forces hit targets near Gaza's largest hospital. There are also reports of thousands of Palestinians breaking into UN warehouses, desperate for food and other basic necessities. As this war intensifies, the situation for civilians in Gaza is growing even more dangerous.
Israeli forces are on the ground in Gaza and in the air above it. According to the Israel Defense Forces, in one day, fighter jets hit more than 450 targets linked to Hamas, including tunnels and other underground infrastructure. They say expanded ground forces are helping direct airstrikes and fighting terrorist cells. In an address, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the war will be long and difficult. He said Israel is preparing for a broader ground invasion to destroy Hamas. On Sunday, the Israeli military again told civilians in Gaza to move south, where they said humanitarian efforts will be expanding. Israeli strikes cut off Gaza's phone service and internet access, but it was gradually being restored Sunday. 3 weeks after the Hamas terror attack that killed 1,400 people in Israel, Hamas rocket strikes continue. People ran for cover in Tel Aviv, and in central Israel, several people were hurt. With the expanded ground operation in Gaza, there's concern for hostages who are still being held there.
We are very worried about our dearest, that they are there.
Meanwhile, protests were held this weekend across the U.S. and around the globe, calling for a ceasefire.
What the Israelis are doing, this is genocide.
The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says the death toll there stands at more than 7,700.
And Hamas's health ministry says of those victims, more than 2,000 are women and more than 3,000 are children. Last week, President Biden questioned the accuracy of some of the Palestinian numbers, but Max, the UN, and other humanitarian groups.
And Bradley, we know the world is watching on right now. What has the international reaction been to the ground operation?
News has learned that Saudi Arabia's defense minister will travel to Washington and meet with U.S. national security officials. And here in New York on Monday, Max, the UN Security Council is set to meet. They'll certainly be reacting to what's happened over the weekend.
Bradley Blackburn reporting live for us in New York this morning. Thank you. As noted, the humanitarian crisis on the ground in Gaza is prompting demonstrations around the world, from Istanbul to London and Los Angeles. Thousands of people took to the streets on Saturday, calling for a ceasefire. Here was the scene in New York last night as demonstrators completely filled the Brooklyn Bridge for what they called the Flood Brooklyn for Gaza March. And we saw similar scenes on Saturday in San Francisco as well, as pro-Palestinian demonstrators marched on Highway 101 and the Octavia Street on-ramp. The CHP put the size of the crowd at more than 15,000 people. That forced the agency to shut down all incoming traffic into San Francisco from the Bay Bridge for a short time. But it was over rather quickly. No word of any arrests or confrontations with police at this time. Many protesters are calling for an end to the bloodshed in the Middle East. Our John Ramos was there as a march began along San Francisco's Embarcadero.
Overnight, Israeli tanks began being what's called a ground incursion into Gaza. Whether they would stay was unknown, but Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, seemed pretty clear, saying, quote, "We moved to the next stage in the war. Last evening, the ground shook in Gaza. We attacked above ground and underground. The instructions to the forces are clear. The campaign will continue until further notice." Israel says it is targeting Hamas, but Gaza is not the only place this war is happening. It's also happening right here, with rallies like this one in the plaza across from San Francisco's Ferry Building, growing in size and intensity with each passing week.
I mean, Palestinians are being ethnically cleansed by the day. We're seeing it. 1.4 million are without homes. No food, no access to water. This is a humanitarian crisis. This is a man-made humanitarian crisis, and I fear that it will only get worse.
My fear is that they will just abolish all the Palestinians out of Palestine. They will just get rid of them, one way or another.
And in the crowd, there were plenty of Jewish people as well, calling for Israel to resist a ground assault on Gaza.
No, we've seen it coming, but again, without a ceasefire, there's never going to be any chance of peace for either side.
But peace is probably not the objective of either side right now. Hamas operates in a vast array of tunnels dug under densely populated areas of Gaza, which will be a tactical nightmare for Israel if and when it begins a ground assault. Roger Fagelson is executive director of San Francisco Hillel, a cultural group for Bay Area Jewish college students. He's concerned what a ground assault could mean for public opinion.
I think it makes it much more complicated for us, especially as American Jews here. The college students are already on edge. They're scared. They're nervous. They're unhappy, largely because of all the vocal protests calling for basically the destruction of Israel.
He points to a phrase that is frequently being chanted at the pro-Palestinian rallies.
From the river to the sea! From the river to the sea! Palestine will be free!
When you hear from the river to the sea, we're talking about from the Mediterranean to the River Jordan. That basically encompasses the entire territory of Israel. So they're calling for the destruction of Israel and, to an extent, the destruction of the Jewish people. So how would you feel?
There are plenty of feelings on both sides, which means there isn't much room for compromise. Ted Franklin thinks it starts with an end to bloodshed, and he doesn't think Israeli tanks rolling into Gaza will make that happen anytime soon.
I think it'll be a catastrophe, and a catastrophe for Israel as well as for the Palestinians. There's no easy way out. The true solution is a political solution, and as elusive as that may be.
Both sides are convinced they are right and that they are fighting for their very survival. It's a combination that usually produces pretty tragic results.
Stay up to date with the very latest coming out of Israel and Gaza on our website, KPIX.com, and streaming on the CBS News app.
Well, we still have the rest of Sunday with first alert status. Take a look at the red flag warning. That's got most of the Bay Area included. It doesn't include the immediate Bay, but everybody else has a red flag warning until 5 o'clock tonight. Strong winds in the mountains primarily and low humidities have elevated the fire risk and the fire concern. And if we look at the wind advisory, that is a little more traditional in terms of it's limited to the mountains where we're going to see some of the strongest wind gusts today. We're kind of seeing the strongest winds right now. And over the next few hours, we'll stay right about here before things calm down through the rest of today. I'll walk you through that coming up in the complete first alert forecast in just a bit.
Halloween is back in the Castro for the first time in 17 years. And merchants say the timing could not be any better. They tell our Da Lin it is a way to counter the so-called doom loop narrative that San Francisco is spiraling out of control.
The new format is very different from back in 2006. Back in the days, they would shut down Castro Street and turn it into one big party. This time, they made sure to keep the street open as a way of crowd control. Halloween festivities made a thrilling comeback in the Castro. Spooky, energetic, and organized.
Energy is what we need to heal this city and to recover from the pandemic and to get out of that ugly narrative that we've been in. Fastest wins!
Terry Aston Bennett is the co-owner of Cliff's Variety and the president of the Castro Merchants Association.
Go!
In the return of Halloween in the Castro, she also brought back the long-absent pie-eating contest.
My great-grandfather started Halloween in the Castro back in the 40s, and the pie-eating contest was one of the original activities from Halloween.
Cliff's was one of many businesses that hosted fun activities to celebrate the Halloween weekend. Others held drag contests, costume competitions, and dance parties.
It's important to bring the right Halloween party back to the Castro. That this needs to be a safe, family-friendly event focused on our community, because community is what the Castro is all about. And Halloween is truly the high holiday of the Castro.
The city and organizers shut down Halloween in the Castro after a mass shooting in 2006 injured 9 people. Many say the annual party became too big, too rowdy, and too dangerous. Tens of thousands of people would shut down the neighborhood and party in the streets.
We didn't want to shut the streets down. We didn't want to bring in that scary element that happened, because that really negatively impacted the whole neighborhood.
Businesses say it was the perfect time to relaunch the celebration because it increased foot traffic.
A really critical time for the neighborhood to come together as we're trying to rebuild after everything kind of collapsed.
The Castro wasn't alone. On Valencia Street in the Mission, organizers turned a couple of car-free blocks into what they say is an anti-doom loop pedestrian promenade with pickleball, games, and music to support small businesses.
Honestly, joy is the anti-doom loop story. And joy isn't hard to access. It's just when things get rough, it's easy to get caught up into all that's not working. But this is working.
I'm a Vice Queen and I've got a killer axe here.
I am Satan. I'm the devil. And this is my toy.
We're ducks in space and we have our pet ducks with us.
We're the Brown Twins.
I'm Vivian.
And I'm Miriam. And happy Halloween.
Good job, guys. Good job.
And Terry couldn't be happier to see something that her great-grandfather started return to her neighborhood.
Costume, there's people out on the streets. There were people shopping. It blew my expectations out of the water.
One more day of fun. Sunday will focus on the kids where they can trick or treat, do arts and crafts, and compete in a kids-only costume contest.